Finally seeing inflation's impact on retail sales. With inflation remaining sky high, July saw retail sales remain flat month over month after increasing by just 1% in June. What does it mean if retail sales continue to remain stagnant? How can we encourage spending in the months to come? We will be discussing this as well as some new store openings and other consumer behavior news right now because you're watching Everything We Know About Retail. It is the show where we tell you everything we know about retail. We broadcast live on the internet most Thursdays at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, but you can watch us anytime at everythingweknow.show. My name is Ebere Anokute. I'm coming to you live from New York. In July, I bought some new clothes that I probably didn't need.
My name is James Cook. I'm coming to you from Indiana. In July, I bought randomly sitting on my desk this book, Meet Me by the Fountain. It's an
Okay.
architectural history of the shopping mall. What a surprise.
It's almost like you planted that, James.
It's just been sitting here. It was just perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Well, we both research retail and real estate for JLL. And so we are going to get right into the show this week and tell you the three things that we know about retail.
All right, well, let's kick it off, Barry. What do you know about retail?
James, the first thing we know about retail is that retail sales were flat in July. So after increasing by about 1% in June, retail sales did not increase at all month to month in July, although they did show a 10% increase year over year, which is likely due to inflation. So I'm going to add this graph to the screen. This shows how the consumer price index has changed going back to, I believe, around 2013. And in July, it was 8.5% higher than it was a year ago, which is down a little bit from the 40-year high that we observed in June. So you can see that across all categories, it was around 8.5%, but food and beverage in particular increased by almost 11%. I had to change the rubric or the axis on the side of this graph so that I could show just how much inflation has affected food and beverage prices. And if you take out food and beverage and energy, aka gasoline, it is only up by around 6%. So, I mean, James, have you observed a massive increase in the cost of food for you over the past month or so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, in the past month, not sure, but like in the past few months,
Right.
definitely cost of groceries. I just got back from California, and I think it's even more exacerbated on the coasts.
Mm.
Like I had somewhere, I just had a burger and it was like $20, and it wasn't like a fancy burger place. So I think the cost of everything that goes into, in that case, operating a restaurant is going up.
Yeah, absolutely. I have been trying to be more conscious with spending money on food and things like that. So I went to the grocery store again because I'm not a online grocery guy. I'm more of an in-person grocery guy when I do go. And I was just I didn't think I got that many things, but it still came out to around $75. And I was, like, wow, look at inflation hitting me in the face, outside of work, something we discuss all the time that's really impacting my life. You
You're
know,
like, what am I at Whole Foods right now?
Honestly, and I wasn't, and I thought about going over there, but I said, listen, if the prices are like this over here, I can only imagine, how much higher they are, in those more luxury grocery stores. So, obviously I drove to the grocery store, and gas is where we've seen the biggest chunk of inflation, right? Gas stations were up almost 40% from July 2021. And that's interesting because fuel prices have actually been coming down since they peaked earlier in the summer. And it looks like consumers have been applying some of the money that they're saving on gasoline to other categories. So we saw an increase in spending for online retailers, right? Non-store retailers came up by around 2.7% month to month, but they're up 20% year over year, which is definitely significant. And miscellaneous stores also gained by 1.5% in July. That is something that's emblematic of a trend that I know Keisha, one of our fellow retail researchers, has highlighted in a lot of her reports as far as spending shifting from durable goods to more services and experiences. And I think that miscellaneous stores category encompasses, nail salons, florists, all those other sort of barbers, those sort of service oriented retailers that we weren't able to really patronize when things were closed down and because of the shutdowns. But now we're seeing, people getting back outside and wanting to spend more money in those areas. And again, since we're outside, we got to look presentable. We have to get ourselves right. So it makes perfect sense that we're seeing consumer spending shift in that way.
What are you seeing as far as new store openings? Is there any kind of connection there?
Definitely. So it looks like retailers are opening more stores right now than they're closing, and they're actually closing fewer than they did last year. So we might have assumed that, inflation would impact retail sales, which ultimately would lead to less demand for, retail spaces. But that isn't exactly what's been playing out in the market. So according to Coresight Research, there were around 4,300 announced store openings in the US in the first half of this year, and a little over 1,900 announced closures. So this overall amounts to 2% more openings than in the first half of 2021. And get ready for this, James. 58% fewer closures from the same period last year. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
that's definitely significant, and it's I think it makes a lot of sense, coming off of 2020 and the first half of 2021, after such a period of flux and uncertainty for every category. A lot of retailers were forced to close their operations. We saw a lot of restaurants and food and beverage places unfortunately have to take that dive in 2020, and a bunch of other categories that weren't essential retailers were negatively impacted. So we saw a lot more closures in that time. But again, so many different parts of the economy have begun to bounce back, and we've seen spending increase in a bunch of different categories, which leads to fewer closures than we saw in 2021. So far this year, when it comes to who is opening the stores, almost half, 45% of all store openings have been for discount chains. And James, I know that that's not necessarily a new trend. I feel like they were relatively active before the pandemic, but it makes perfect sense that as consumer prices have, skyrocketed in the past couple of months, that everyone has a special affinity for those discount chains, going forward, trying to, cut costs wherever they can, especially with the back to school season. Again, another lovely survey run by Keisha, where she saw that respondents were definitely looking to discount chains and those other mass merchandisers to go to for their back to school shopping this year, because they're looking to cut costs wherever they can. And just so we know, apparel retailers account for a third, so 33% of closures so far this year. And I think when you compare that with the uptick in spending for non-store retailers, it maybe makes a little bit of sense. Apparel is probably one of the categories that, aside from like books, has been really, really penetrated by e-commerce and the ability to fulfill orders from all over the country. So, it's not totally unsurprising that that we've seen that many store closures from them. But again, I think it's a case of the survival of the fittest. Right. So those retailers that have been able to profit throughout the pandemic and that were quick to adopt e-commerce capabilities, they're staying in business and they're using their stores as a touch point for their brands. Whereas the ones that were a little slower to adopt have, unfortunately fallen by the wayside. So that's interesting. James, since we're talking about apparel stores, can you tell me anything about any apparel stores that are opening? We hear a lot about them closing, but do you have any news about apparel stores that are opening?
I do. Before we get to that, shout out to Mark, who's watching us on LinkedIn. Greetings from Cologne. Very
Oh,
nice. Thank you,
greetings.
Mark. And Mark, I'm about to tell you all the second thing we know about retail is a new opening of sorts. This is a pop-up. Let me pull this up on the screen. So this is GU, and I'm afraid to say I was not familiar with GU until I heard about this pop-up being announced for Soho. It's going to be opening this fall. It is actually, so it's another sister brand to Uniqlo from Fast Retailing, which is the parent company of Uniqlo. So this is a 2,900 square foot ground floor space on Broadway in Soho. The address is 579 Broadway. So it's a test. It's pronounced GU, and it's just the letters GU, and it is a slightly different brand from Uniqlo.
How is it different? You said it's a sister company. Do they only sell, women's clothing, men's clothing, children? Like, in what ways is it different, and where do they usually open stores? I don't think I've ever heard of GU as a retailer.
Yeah, let me pull up the website here. I don't even think they have a US website. This is the Japanese website. So Uniqlo, I mean, what would you call that? Affordable basics, I guess. Is that how you
Mm,
would call?
yeah,
Like I
that's
know
fair.
you'll go to Uniqlo, right?
Yeah. When it comes to the brands in that same price point, Uniqlo, I probably go to the least, but I definitely, if I see Uniqlo, I'm gonna pop in and see what they have 10 times out of 10.
Okay, and we would call it a competitor of maybe it's like at the H&M price point level. Is that
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
So GU, and I should say that GU sounds like the Japanese word for freedom. So that's a
Okay.
little bit of branding there. GU is men's and women's clothing and kids. Um, and it is trendier than Uniqlo and it is lower price points. So
Hmm.
they've got more, like Uniqlo, I always think of like solid basics, and
Right.
this is more prints. It's got more flair. It's targeting a younger demographic. It's historically been mostly women. An article from Forbes said it's like 60 to 70% of the customers are women,
Okay.
though that is shifting. They're trying to make that shift. Um, so this is really an opportunity for them to trial out the US market and see, you know, um, if they can sort of take, and they've had to do this already with Uniqlo, is take that existing Japanese concept and kind of fit it, literally fit it to the US customer, because we are on average larger and taller than the average Japanese shopper.
Definitely. So, I mean, I know that it makes sense that they would go to Soho first. That's a great way to, reach the people. And it's a very active neighborhood in New York. But do they have any plans to open other stores elsewhere in the US? Are they aiming for like a national expansion, or is it really just a bit of a test?
So they've not made any real announcements other than that they're going to be opening up this pop-up in the fall.
Mhm.
Clearly, it's a test to see if this brand makes sense in the US. I think and this is just James' take, nothing official here. I think
Mhm.
the Uniqlo brand is a little less flashy than the average American consumer would want. And
Mhm.
I think that the GU brand may be in some ways more appealing to the American shopper, and I think this is a way to test that out and see if it makes sense. But I mean, right now there's about 50 Uniqlo stores in North America,
Mhm.
and there's plans to do a lot more than that. In April, they said they're going to open 30 new Uniqlo stores annually in North America. And
Mhm.
right now, there's only about 65 in the US and Canada, to the point where I feel like if you don't live in a big city or you don't live on the coast, you may not even be familiar with the Uniqlo brand, even though
Mhm.
it's been around for a while in the US.
Definitely. All of this kind of makes me wonder about Shein. Have you heard of Shein, James? That brand?
Absolutely. Yeah. Shein, when I was in Las Vegas, there was a Shein pop-up
Okay.
at blanking on the name. It's the newest hotel in the Las Vegas Strip, has a bunch of retail. They had a Shein pop-up there.
Interesting.
Resorts World, that's the name
Okay.
of it. But yeah, what do you know? Like it's mostly social media fast fashion, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of similar, well, to this GU brand, except that it's from China rather than Japan. And I wonder, hearing that they had a pop up in Las Vegas kind of makes me understand maybe why GU's trying to expand aggressively, even with Uniqlo or with GU, or fast retailing is trying to expand aggressively. Because thus far, I believe Shein is online only, right? I only really know about them as a, not even digitally native. They only exist, on the internet. And so if they're looking to open stores, which makes perfect sense because their sales have been, you know, pretty impressive in the last, I'd say, 2 years or so, and just their like name recognition and like notoriety of the brand has really improved like tangibly. So it makes sense that they would be trying to expand to physical stores, and I guess GU is I can see them trying to remain competitive with them because Shein has a lot of those, I'd say, like ultra trendy, right? Like, when you describe GU as trendier than Uniqlo, I'm like, well, Uniqlo is pretty trendy. So like, how do we decide, what makes something trendier? But Shein, if you see something on an Instagram person or a celebrity one day, a dupe is probably on Shein within the next 2 weeks, right? They are really have their finger on the pulse of all of the newest trends and things like that. So I see GU and Shein competing for market share going forward, and I guess they at least around 3,000 square feet in New York City. I could see that being, double or triple that in other markets, right? There isn't that many large spaces available in New York, but in maybe Las Vegas or in Florida somewhere, I could see, them taking up to 10,000 square feet for some of because they definitely have the inventory. Okay. These places have innumerable styles on their website because they're just constantly adding new things there. So very interesting to see this activity.
Yeah, I feel like for Shein, one of the ways they can be so fast, and they're actually like the apex of fast fashion. You're right. It's like takes them a week or two to get it out. Is that
Truly.
it is direct to consumer, and they don't have to ship to stores. They're just shipping from the factories, and their prices are super low. So I don't know what Shein's plans are for opening stores, but if they did that, they'd have to slow down a little bit on being fast fashion. And the other thing too with Shein is there's been like, have you seen? You're more into the social media world than I am, but have you seen pushback to this idea of disposable fashion as being less sustainable than more, because Uniqlo is more expensive, so it's more quality and it's more
Definitely.
durable.
Definitely.
Whereas, yeah, I feel like this really cheap fast fashion, you just end up throwing it away.
Yeah, I feel like I read about the pushback more than I actually see it or
Okay.
get a sense of the sentiment from like Twitter or social media places like that. But it makes perfect sense, honestly. When you were saying it's a lower price point than Uniqlo, Uniqlo isn't. Like I said, it's around the H&M area, so to go even lower than that is kind of really what made my mind go straight to Shein because I mean, the clothes there are I don't know, they're very, very inexpensive. And I think that the quality sort of matches. So for me, it's not really where I want to go, right? As trendy as some of the things are, I'm at a place now where I don't want to be buying something that I'm going to throw away, a month later, or that's going to rip, right? Because the quality is not up to par. So, but a lot of the research that I've seen has shown that naturally Gen Z and millennials are going to come to account for around 60% of the apparel market in the next 5 years or so. And so those people may not be as, how do I say, well capitalized as some older demographics. And so maybe that's what they're aiming towards, right? With trends changing so quickly thanks to social media, maybe that is the only real way to stay competitive, is to have a new type of shirt every week. So I think it's a really interesting space to follow, because it has implications, like you're saying, for the environment and for everything else. A lot of the waste being created is definitely a concern for the industry at large. But clearly, if we're opening GU stores, then I wonder how much of a concern it actually is.
Well, and the Shein of bricks and mortar world is really Primark. Like,
Right,
and
right.
they're expanding in the US too, and they're kind of known for having the cheapest stuff. And their thing is they don't even sell stuff online. Um, Although they're trying to start that, but not here in the US.
Hmm.
They don't even sell stuff online because it would add too much cost. And the idea is to sell things as cheaply as possible. So yeah, we've got several fast fashion brands that are expanding in the US right now.
Yeah, very
Um,
exciting times.
so Ebere, what else do you know about retail?
Well, James, here is the third thing that we know about retail, which is that foot traffic is returning to movie theaters. So, switching gears a little bit, right, away from apparel, and when we talk about, what are people spending their money on? If they're not spending it on goods and durable and non-durable goods, where is it going, right? Well, it's going to experiences. So, after being one of the most hard hit categories during the pandemic, right? We're finally beginning to see people return to these movie theaters en masse. So this slide that we have right here comes from our quarterly outlook deck, and it shows that how retail foot traffic, according to Placer AI, has changed to these different, venues over the course of since the onset of the pandemic. So we can see here, obviously, shopping centers, fitness, theaters, and attractions. And what's been interesting to note is that the sort of categories that we're not able to replicate at home have been the slowest to recover when it comes to, or have been the fastest to recover when it comes to foot traffic, right? The things that we're able to do at home, people have been a little bit slower to get back up and go do those things. So when it comes to theaters and music venues, when it comes to these music venues, we have shifted a lot of our consumption of movies and stuff to streaming services because during the pandemic, these businesses were not deemed essential, and therefore they were mandated to remain closed for a lot longer than other retailers, right? Which resulted, as we can see on the graph, in an almost 100% decrease in foot traffic at the height of the pandemic, right? So honestly, at this point, it's sort of, I think it's almost a miracle that these businesses are still alive, right? After, I don't know how you go from 100% decrease in foot traffic and find your way to bounce back. But, I think it's interesting, places like shopping centers, right? We've seen that those have come, more or less within like 10% of pre-pandemic foot traffic. And I think that sort of remaining 10% has to do with, like I said, the shift to online grocery, right? So whereas we almost all went to grocery stores to shop prior to the pandemic. Obviously, online grocery was a thing, but it wasn't as big. Having exploded since the pandemic has led to, I think, a permanent shift in the way that people shop. And so I wonder if we're ever going to recover that little 8%. But obviously, for attractions, for theaters and music venues, that sort of stuff, people have shown a real interest in getting back to, and that's why we've seen it sort of start to recover. But we still have a ways to go. So according to Placer AI, the largest chains, which are Cinemark, Regal, and AMC, came within 25% of their 2019 foot traffic in June. July data hasn't been made available yet, but we've seen, really strong gains been made in June. So Cinemark is only down around 4.1% from its 2019 levels as it pertains to foot traffic, which compared to January of this year, it was down 30%. So there's definitely been a real change in consumer behavior in the last few months. Regal was down around 15.5% in June after being down 50% from 2019 levels in January. And AMC, still been the slowest to recover, is down 24.9%. But again, it was down 50% in January. So we're seeing a lot of growth there. So, I mean, that leads me to ask you, James, have you seen any movies recently? Have you gone to the movies for any reason? Is there something that has drawn you back to going to see movies in person?
I saw a few over last winter, but I haven't been to the movies in person. I've been to some plays and concerts recently.
Right.
Um, but I think it takes a lot because of the number of streaming subscriptions that we've accumulated in our
Oh,
home.
yeah.
It
Oh, yeah.
takes a lot for me to get out there, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I feel that too. Unfortunately, there's movies I've wanted to see so far this year, but if any of them were available on a streaming service, I definitely stayed on my couch and watched them there, as opposed to going back to the movies. But James, you and I are not the norm when it comes to this, okay? Because there have been a couple summer blockbusters that have really driven ticket sales over the course of the past, 2 or 3 months or so. So I know you could probably guess what the first one is. Top Gun Maverick. I feel like I hear that from so many people who I never heard the words Top Gun from before. But in the last 2 or 3 months, I've been hearing so much about this movie, almost enough to make me want to see it. Not enough to actually make me go, but almost enough to make me want to. And again, a lot of people went to see it because they grossed over $675 million domestically and eclipsed the $1 billion mark to gross around $1.4 billion worldwide. So clearly it is a, smash movie. And to my knowledge, wasn't available on any streaming services, right? So people
No.
had to go back to the theater to see it. And I heard on a podcast that I listened to that I believe it's now maybe the top 7 highest grossing film of all time, which in a post pandemic, movie theater era is an amazing feat. So definitely something to write home about. We also saw Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. They grossed $411 million domestically and $954 million globally. And lastly, Jurassic World Dominion. $373 million domestically, and again, almost $1 billion globally, 974 million. And ashamed to say I haven't seen any of those. I probably would have gone to see Doctor Strange, but I just, like you said, it takes a lot to get me to go up, to the movie theaters these days when there's, I pay for so many streaming services at home at this point. It's like, I it's still a little too comfortable for me. So I didn't get to see any of these movies, but despite this shift to streaming, a lot of consumers are definitely eager to return to theaters despite, inflation driving up prices. And something that's also interesting that Placer noted in their report was that even though people aren't going to see movies as often as they did back in 2019, it's become more of an event. So when they do go, they're willing to drive farther and spend more on each movie night, which I can definitely, I identify with that. If I'm going to go to the movies, I'm probably going to buy more concessions than I ever did in the past, just because I want to make it, I want to get the full experience, and I'm probably going to go to a nicer movie theater as well. Like I'd probably go to an iPic or one of those other, luxury, I think Regal has a really nice theater downtown, because I'm going to want to make it more of an experience. And again, we see that reflected in the consumer spending patterns shifting more to experiences and services and away from goods. So I guess my final question to you, James, is do you think that we will ever fully recover foot traffic to movie theaters? And the reason I ask that is because obviously streaming has become very comfortable. And I think I compare it in my head to sort of what we're seeing when it comes to office return, and how office populations right now are at around 45% or so. But pre-pandemic they weren't at 100, they were at around 80 or so, right? So it's like we have a ways to recover, but is 100% even really the goal, I guess, is the question. So I pose that to you. When it comes to movie theaters, is streaming too comfortable, or do you think we'll ever fully recover that foot traffic?
I mean, I think to your point about movie going being more of an event, I think that that's sort of the future.
Right.
Is you'll have these big time, for example, people that I know who, like, Top Gun was their favorite movie growing up, went as a group and like made a big deal out of going to see Top Gun. And so, like you said, went out to dinner, probably had some drinks, then went to the
Sure.
nicest theater in town. So I would say visits don't go away, but they're more infrequent. And I know, when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I'd go to like a movie a week, like
Right.
a lot. And now, I mean, I probably go to one or two a year in the theater, yet I see more movies than ever. Like I'll see all those movies. Like I already saw Doctor Strange on Disney Plus, and the others as they come to the streamers, I'll see them.
Right.
But it's so interesting. We're in a golden age of television and movies in a lot of ways, but the theaters, there are definitely too many. So the future for the theater, fewer theaters, but the ones that remain are nicer and have more amenities and are going to be more expensive. So in a lot of ways, it's like the malls. We're going to have fewer malls in the future, but the ones that remain are going to be really popular and really nice to go to.
I completely agree with that, James. And I think even further, we are in a golden age of movies and TVs, but we're also in a big wave of nostalgia, right? So there's a reboot for everything. And I think we all thought maybe that was going to be like a 1 or 2 year situation. And it's clear this is going to be maybe 10 years, or if not indefinite, people constantly remaking and rebooting things that they created before.
It's kind of tiring in a way. Like nothing is original. And I
Mhm.
understand the theaters, if you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make one piece of content,
Right.
you want it to be something that you think already has a built-in audience. So instead of taking a bet on a new script that nobody's ever heard of,
Right.
make the 14th Terminator movie, or I mean, Marvel's the worst. What are there, like 70 Marvel movies? I mean,
I
I honestly don't know, but it
I
seems
don't
like
either.
that.
Yeah, it seems like that.
Um,
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. No, I was just gonna say. So what is interesting though, just from my purely like movie lover standpoint is that you'll see these certain movies that do break through, and it reminds us that you can have a blockbuster that's not a franchise or a reboot. And I'm thinking about Parasite.
Sure.
Did you see Parasite?
I sure did. I
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
did.
yeah. That was a big hit, and there were some others too. There was a that Tiffany Haddish movie like Girls Night Out or something
Girls
like
Trip.
that.
Yeah,
Girls
that was
Trip, which
great.
I did not see,
Mhm.
but was a big blockbuster, and was was not a franchise, but it's the kind of movie people like to see.
Absolutely. And I think that is what is going to save movie theaters going forward, right? I will wait until, Top Gun 7 comes out on Disney Plus, right? Or not even Disney, HBO Max, whatever it is, Discovery Plus. I'll wait to watch that at home, right? But if there is an original movie that doesn't have any, a lot of hype around it, maybe because of the director or the writer, but doesn't have, a large franchise behind it, I think I'd be way more willing. That is going to get me to the movie theaters sooner than, any of these other nostalgia driven reboots and sequels and things like that. So I think that that's something that these studios are going to have to consider, right? If we're going to make it an event, make it an event. Make me go and see something that I haven't seen before that I can go back and spread through word of mouth to everyone I know. Hey, have you seen the new blank movie? And for people to have no idea what it is, but just have a glowing review, whether it's from myself, from Rotten Tomatoes, I feel like that is going to drive traffic back to theaters sooner than this nostalgia wave, which I honestly don't think is ever going to go away because, like you said, we know there's a built-in audience for these products, so they're going to keep serving that audience until we say we've had enough, So very, very, well, remains to be seen, but hopefully, I think this will drive, like you said, the underperforming movie theaters are probably going to go out of business, and the ones that remain are going to have a lot more amenities. They're going to have a lot, a much more upgraded, elevated experience, and hopefully that includes, unique, original, never before seen content as well. So
Yeah.
we'll have
And
to wait.
from like the theater's standpoint, there's a consolidation. There were more locally owned or regional chains. Many of those are going away, like closing completely, or some have been acquired. So you're
Mhm.
going to have sort of this consolidation. And we already do. We only have like two big chains, but we'll see that continue, and they'll close some of their lesser operating locations, and the ones that they keep open that aren't their fancy locations, they're going to be more automated than ever. I mean, it used to be that somebody would rip your ticket. My local theater, which is not a fancy one, yeah, right, yeah, you used to do that,
That was my
right?
job. Yep.
My local theater doesn't have that. You just buy a movie from the kiosk and you just walk in, and it's kind of like you showed it to the person at the snack bar, and it's very bare bones.
Mhm.
And that, conversely, the opposite is something like Alamo Draft House, which is an entire food and beverage experience along with the movie going experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that reminds me of the last time I went to the theater to see a movie. I don't even remember what the movie was, but I do remember, I bought my ticket online and then I got to who I assumed was the usher, and she just scanned the ticket and said, "You're good to go." And I found myself in a strange conundrum because when I was working at the movie theaters, I used to think like, you see that it says theater 4, you know where theater 4 is. I almost don't know why I'm here, just go to theater 4 where it says what your show is going to be. But in this moment, the lady scanned my ticket and then said nothing, and I had to ask her, "Where do I go?
Yeah.
Like, which theater is it in?" It didn't say it on the receipt that I had in my email, so I really had to ask. And she was like, "Oh, it's theater 6 over there." And I was like, "Wow." I think all of that, is factoring into the experience at a movie theater. And again, hopefully, as we continue on in this economic cycle, we'll see the service and the experience at the movie theaters stay high and continue to improve rather than go in the other direction and have people wandering around, the arcade looking for for where theater 5 is. So
Well,
that's my
it's I think that, right. So we're saying the future is fewer theaters, better theaters, but
Mhm.
there's always the fact that the people who run theaters are usually in high school,
Oh yeah.
which means you're not generally getting the best service.
Yeah, you just got to contend with that.
Awesome. So to wrap things up, I wanted to remind everybody to download our latest research. I think our latest report is the back to school shopper survey. You just go to jll.com and go to trends and insights section. You can see all of our latest reports. And then we also have a podcast called Where We Buy. The latest episode, I interviewed the owners and operators of Maker Kitchens, which they have 13 different ghost kitchen locations, and they're expanding. Perfect timing. Like right after we did the podcast, I was in LA and actually got to go visit one of the Maker kitchens. So just
Awesome.
pull up the Where We Buy podcast on whatever app you use, or go to wherewebuy.show.
Absolutely. And also be sure to subscribe to this show in YouTube, and make sure that you click on the little bell icon so that you're notified every time a new show comes out each week. Additionally, you could follow us on the JLO Retail page on LinkedIn, and everything that we are talking about is linked there as well.
You can check us out at everythingweknow.show. We're going to be back next week. New episode next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. So, Ebere, what did we learn about retail today?
James, I learned that there is something that's going to rival Shein, and it's called GU, and it's coming to Soho.
Yeah, GU, that was a new one. And I think today I learned that movie theaters can make a comeback. It's just going to be a different kind of comeback from what it was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So it's a different feature for the movie theaters. And so that's what we learned about retail today. If you want to know more of everything we know about retail, you can join us here again next week.